Week 12 is officially here, and today I got you guys covered with my top 40 wide receivers in the tier list format I bring you guys every single week. It is crunch time. There's only a few weeks left in the fantasy regular season, and it is time to secure playoff spots. But before we go into the official tier list, we go through the will they play tier. And the main guys on the list this week are going to be Chris Godwin, who was confirmed healthy enough to be able to play on Sunday. Again, monitor the situation. There could be a snap count. Obviously, coming off a fibula injury, older wide receiver, there could be limitations here. However, with that being said, if you're extremely desperate, he's probably a fringe top 45, top 50 level wide receiver in my rankings. Xavier Worthy, wide receiver of the Kansas City Chiefs, he is a true questionable with an ankle injury. I do expect him to play, but again, monitor some type of news. If something gets released Saturday night, Xavier Worthy, he's going to be on a pitch count, or Xavier Worthy trending towards not playing, he will obviously not make this list, but at the same time, assuming he's ready to go, fringe top 36 level wide receiver. And the wide receivers that have already been ruled out, we got Drake London, we got Brian Thomas Jr., and we got Marvin Harrison Jr. So if you have any of those guys, make sure you don't leave them in your lineup. It also applies to the 4 teams on bye this week: the Denver Broncos, the LA Chargers, the Miami Dolphins, the Washington Commanders. Cortland Sutton, Troy Franklin, Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnson, Keenan Allen, Jalen Waddle, Deebo Samuel, Terry McLaurin. If you have any of those guys in your lineup, make sure you're not the doofus that leaves them in. But we move on to tier number 1, and this typically would actually be the top 3 in addition to the guys that aren't going to play this week, in addition to the bye week teams. We do also have Jamar Chase. He unfortunately will be suspended. Couldn't keep his saliva to himself. He would have been a top 3 wide receiver in my rankings. But because he's not playing, I consider this the tier of 2. We got Jackson Smith-Njigba and Puka Nacua. We'll start off the top, the new king of my wide receiver rankings, Jackson Smith-Njigba. And look, he overtook Puka Nacua in terms of points per game, averaging 21.8 on the season. And man, this is a clear bounce back spot for the Seahawks offense. Obviously, we saw last week, really struggled against the Rams, 4 turnovers from Sam Darnold. I think the Seahawks will be right back on track against Tennessee. And man, Jackson Smith-Njigba has been the definition of a target alpha. 38.8% seasonal target share. And like I said, 21.8 points per game, which ranks as the wide receiver 1 in fantasy. And this has been despite him not being in the top 50 in the NFL in terms of routes run this year. JSN's a stud. He gets force-fed the ball in this offense. And in PPR formats, man, he is the definition of a hammer. And I actually do prefer him this week to Puka Nacua. But I will talk about Puka Nacua because I do think he is in this tier. I just think JSN has kind of usurped him in these last couple of weeks. And realistically, since he came back from injury, we just simply haven't seen the overall routes for Puka. I just mentioned JSN hasn't been a top 50 wide receiver in routes this year. And yet Puka Nacua is running even less routes. Since coming back from injury, Puka Nacua has only been running 21 routes per game, which ranked 74th in the NFL. Still over 18 PPR points per game, 18.2 in that stretch. Obviously, we know when he's on the field, he's able to command targets, but if he's only running a limited amount of routes because they're running 13 personnel, there is a slight concern when it comes to Puka. I do think this is a game environment to get back on track, though. Tampa Bay, pass funnel defense, high-scoring game environment, very, very good implied total for the Rams. So with Puka Nacua, even though it hasn't been the greatest since he came back, I do think this is a get-back spot for him to potentially score 25-plus points. But moving off of the top 2, we head on to the next tier, the A tier, a.k.a. the mid wide receiver 1s. Amon St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Rashee Rice. Starting with number 3, Amon St. Brown going up against the New York Giants. Man, this is a cake matchup for him this week. Very, very good implied total for this Lions offense. Second highest over-under of the slate, and these sharps are favoring the over in this matchup. His production, it's been very volatile since the bye week. Like, realistically, we haven't really seen the Amon St. Brown dominance like we saw prior to the bye. But when we're looking at the overall macro of the situation, Sam Laporta, he's going to be out this week. He's going to be out for the season. Jameson Williams obviously going to be a factor, but the area that Laporta wins is exactly where St. Brown wins. So I could see going forward with Amon St. Brown, maybe he's a 12 target per game player, 20 point per game player, and he can reestablish himself in that top tier. I do think he slacks a little bit behind JSN and Puka at this point. But with the Lions' projection this week, with how bad the Giants have been defensively, allowing the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers, 33 targets for Amon in the last 3 games, he should be able to get back on track. Next up at wide receiver 4, we got CeeDee Lamb of the Dallas Cowboys going up against the Philadelphia Eagles at home. And CeeDee Lamb, man, he hasn't been that league winner that I thought coming into the year. I do think there's meat left on the bone. I do think he'll end up being even better. But at the same time, even though he hasn't had that big spike week, that big 35, 40-point week that reminds us of who CeeDee Lamb is, he's been averaging 18 points per game, and he has been the wide receiver 7 on the season. Look, I get it. You watch Monday Night Football. 5 catches, 66 yards, a touchdown. Not the craziest performance given the matchup for Lamb, but when you do contextualize that he dropped a walk-in 4-yard touchdown, we could have been looking at a 6-catch, 70-yard, 2-touchdown day. But I do think given the matchup implication, obviously the Raiders last week, a lot of single high, big plays available for George Pickens. We could potentially see some more Quinyon Mitchell on George Pickens this week on the outside. And with CeeDee Lamb running the slot, we could potentially get back to 12 plus, 13 targets in this game. We know the volume spongy is, and we know how much Dallas wants to throw the football. And then finally at wide receiver 5, we got Rashee Rice of the Kansas City Chiefs, and this is the single best game environment of the slate. 27 implied Chiefs points at home, highest over-under of the game slate. We are in for a treat when it comes to this Chiefs offense, but we did finally see the floor game for Rashee Rice. Look, I get it. Anytime you see a floor game and it's 9 targets, 6 receptions, you are feeling very good. But that's just kind of the nature of what Denver does defensively. I mean, they're able to limit the big plays. They are able to limit the yak opportunities. And I do think this is a get-right spot for Rashee Rice. He's still averaging 20.4 points per game in his last 7 games. And as we know with the Chiefs offense, Xavier Worthy banged up coming into this game. Travis Kelce probably going to do his thing. But at the end of the day, the engine of this offense is Rashee Rice, and the Chiefs passing game runs through him. But moving on to tier number 3, we got at number 6, Emeka Egbuka. At number 7, Davante Adams. 8, we have Nico Collins. 9, T. Higgins. 10, George Pickens. And 11, Tedroa McMillan of the Carolina Panthers. We'll start off the top. Same matchup, 6 and 7. We got Emeka Egbuka and we got Davante Adams. And we'll start with Emeka Egbuka. Production hasn't really been the same since his hamstring injury, but he is getting legitimate elite wide receiver 1 usage. 29% target share, 40% air yard share for a Tampa Bay offense that we're optimistic about. With Emeka Egbuka, I understand it is a tough matchup. The Rams defense, they are incredibly stingy against the pass. Number 2 defense in EPA per play against the pass this year. But at the same time, I am simply trusting Egbuka. We know what the talent was earlier in the year when he was healthy. We're seeing the usage that he's getting right now. If he can just match his early season play with the level of volume he's currently getting, there's a wide receiver 1 in here with Egbuka, and I do think he gets back on track. We saw what it looked like in week 10. For Davante Adams, he has been very touchdown reliant this year. I mean, week 11 was an example of it. 1 catch, 1 yard, 1 touchdown. Not the greatest game, but he was able to save it because of that touchdown reception. And this is a pass funnel Bucs defense. We know what they're able to do against the run. And like I mentioned with Puka, they have seeded points in the passing game. On top of that, Jamel Dean, their best corner all year, one of the best corners performing in the NFL, is going to be out for this game. So I do think this Rams passing attack is able to get off at home. We have 28 implied Rams points. We have a guy with Davante Adams who scored 10 touchdowns in 10 games. He might be touchdown reliant, but if he's scoring them, he's going to be a wide receiver 1 in your lineup. At wide receiver 8, we got Nico Collins, who obviously played on Thursday Night Football. Not the greatest game for Nico. 3 targets, 3 receptions, 55 receiving yards, 8.5 PPR points. You expected more, especially what he was able to do in the 2 prior weeks with Davis Mills, but we should be able to bounce back next week. And coming in at wide receiver 9, we have T. Higgins of the Cincinnati Bengals hosting the New England Patriots this week. And sure, it is a tough matchup on face value, but you just have to look at the nuts and bolts of the situation. T. Higgins, with no Jamar Chase, on an offense that will throw the ball 40 plus times, is a set it and forget it top 10 wide receiver option. We've gotten 40 plus passing attempts in 4 of the 5 starts that Joe Flacco has made this year. And if T. Higgins is able to play with Jamar Chase, we know what he looks like as a featured number 1 wide receiver. It's very similar to how we saw with George Pickens without CeeDee Lamb this year. Even despite a tough matchup against Gonzo, I think he's going to get there on volume. 12 plus targets, 8 plus receptions, 120 plus receiving yards is in the range of outcomes for T this week. Speaking of the aforementioned George Pickens, look, I get it. It is a tough matchup. You still have to worry about CeeDee Lamb. But we know that this offense is concentrated, and we saw last week that even when CeeDee Lamb is playing, George Pickens has unlimited upside. Look, I get it. It might be a tough task. He might be facing a lot of Quinyon Mitchell in this game, but I think George Pickens has proven from a talent standpoint, he is a fringe top 10 level wide receiver, and this offense throws the ball too much for me to drop my expectations given his level of play. And then finally at wide receiver 11, welcome back Tedroa McMillan. The usage is always here, man. High 20% target share, obviously looking like a true number 1 alpha wide receiver, but we just didn't really see the spike week. Well, we got it on display in week 11, 33 PPR points, 2 receiving touchdowns, 130 receiving yards. And against a great matchup versus the 49ers pass defense that has really struggled since Nick Bosa and Fred Warner got hurt. With Tedroa McMillan, what else do you look for here? Obviously, the elephant in the room, we need Bryce Young to play well. But if Bryce Young's able to take care of a good matchup, Tetairoa McMillan has all the talent in the world to not only pay off as a wide receiver 1 in fantasy, but potentially be the wide receiver 1 overall in any given week. But moving on to tier number 4, aka the high-end wide receiver 2s. We got Stephon Diggs, Devontae Smith, Jameson Williams, Justin Jefferson, Rome Odunze, Michael Wilson, and Chris Olave this week. Starting at the top, Stephon Diggs traveling on the road to play the Cincinnati Bengals. I already talked about the flip side with T. Higgins. Now we could talk about Stephon Diggs. 89% of the routes in week 11, and he has scored double-digit PPR points in 7 of his last 8 games. The Bengals, they have been the single worst defense in EPA per play against the pass, and Diggs has a 24% yearly target share, 19 targets in his last 2 games, second highest game total of the slate. This is a smash spot for Stephon Diggs. With the increase in routes, I love the higher on his 57.5 receiving yard projection this week on Underdog. At 13, we got Devontae Smith, wide receiver of the Philadelphia Eagles, traveling on the road to play the Dallas Cowboys, and he has been scoring 15 points per game since week 3, and now has a great matchup in the Dome against the Cowboys. With the Cowboys defense, yes, they add Quinnen Williams. You do have DeMarvin Overshown. I really do feel confident about the Cowboys' performance on Monday Night Football against the Raiders. But at the same time, this is still going to be a pass funnel defense. And as we've seen with the Philadelphia Eagles offense, they have actually been better playing through the pass this year. Devontae Smith, he's played like their best wide receiver all year, and he has historically had big games against Dallas, which I think continues this week, hence the aggressive wide receiver 13 ranking. A wide receiver 14, Jameson Williams of the Detroit Lions, going to play the New York Giants at home. And Jameson Williams, man, he has recently been turning it on. 15 plus PPR points in 4 of his last 5 games, and he has been the clear biggest beneficiary of Sam Laporta's back injury. I mentioned how it benefits Amon-Ra St. Brown, but Jameson Williams, man, without another guy that can command targets in this offense, becomes a potential league winner. We've seen what the upside looks like. We know the Detroit offense is going to score points, and we know Jameson Williams is the ceiling raiser of this offense. The Giants matchup, like I said, allowed the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers this year. And I love the higher on his fantasy point projection on Underdog. Give me the higher on 10.75. We're going to get another big play. And I love Jameson Williams this week, a top 15 wide receiver in my rankings. And yes, Jameson Williams will come ahead of Justin Jefferson in my rankings this week. Jefferson, tough matchup going on the road to play Green Bay Packers. And it is a very bad implied game environment. 17.5 implied Minnesota points. And the Packers, man, they have been stingy on the back end. Justin Jefferson, man, he has been extremely frustrating because we've seen, the high floor. He gets all the targets, 10.4 targets per game since week 4, and he has commanded a 31.1% target share in that stretch. It's been frustrating, but in the same time, he's averaging 15 points per game. You got to trust the process. Even if your expectations aren't that of what you had coming into the season, maybe with Jefferson, you're not getting a top 6 wide receiver, but you're probably getting more of a back-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2 moving forward. And at 16, we got Rome Odunze of the Chicago Bears going up to play the Pittsburgh Steelers at home. 24 implied points for the Bears this week, and the Steelers defense is a clear pass funnel. They struggle mightily against outside wide receivers, specifically when it comes to stopping big plays, and Rome Odunze, he can create big plays in this Bears offense. We got the size, we got the speed, we got the verticality for this X-wide receiver, and I do think he's able to take advantage of the Steelers this week, hence why I love the higher on his 21.5 longest reception. I think he rebounds back, and I think he gets there on the back of big plays. Wide receiver 17, we got Michael Wilson of the Arizona Cardinals going to play the Jacksonville Jaguars, and 17 is kind of where I settled on him. I can see if you're very optimistic, you want to push him as a top 12, top 15 option. I can get there, man, because the usage was tremendous in week 11. 33% of the targets, 61% of the air yards in his first game without Marvin Harrison Jr., and this offense has been slinging the rock since Jacoby Brissett took over. 42.4 pass attempts per game since Brissett made his first start. It is very clear with Jacoby Brissett under center, they want to trust the passing game. We've seen Trey McBride kind of ascend, and I do think there's plenty of pie left for Michael Wilson to eat yet again. Of course, there is risk. He's not the greatest overall player. At least he doesn't have the greatest track record. But at the same time, if he's going to get this consistent opportunity, I think you got to plug him into the lineup regardless with wide receiver 2 level expectation this week. And then finally, at wide receiver 18, we got Chris Olave of the New Orleans Saints. 20.5 implied Saints points on the road against the Falcons this week. And man, this is just such a gross game. 39.5 over under. It's probably going to be like a 13-10, 16-13 level game in this divisional affair. But Chris Olave has been an alpha wide receiver, and he has been the definition of consistent this season. double-digit PPR points in 9 of his 10 games. And Olave just posted his second best game of the season without Rashid Shaheed in Week 10. This game, fastest projected pace of the slate. And I did think Tyler Shough looked decent in his last couple of starts. With Chris Olave, you're getting the consistency. But if you're going to get 9.5 targets, you're going to get Shough potentially playing well. We could maybe see more spike weeks in the future. Moving on to the low-end wide receiver 2s. We got Michael Pittman Jr., Zay Flowers, A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf, Alec Pierce, and Romeo Doubs of the Green Bay Packers. Starting off the top, we have the first of the Colts wide receivers with Michael Pittman Jr. And you could argue that this is too low. I mean, he's the wide receiver 12 in seasonal points per game. He's been consistent most of the year. But since Alec Pierce returned from injury, you can make the case this is a 1A, 1B situation with the Colts wide receivers. Yes, Pittman averaging slightly more points per game, but Alec Pierce has a higher yards per route run. Alec Pierce is averaging more receiving yards per game, and Alec Pierce has just simply played better. So we'll see what ends up happening. Obviously, Michael Pittman still has touchdown equity. It's still going to be a very well-performing offense. Do you think we have to pay respect to just how good Alec Pierce has been and downgrade Michael Pittman to the low-end wide receiver 2 status? Wide receiver 20, we got Zay Flowers of the Baltimore Ravens, and he's going to play the New York Jets at home this week. He's been very consistent when Lamar Jackson's in the lineup. You know you're getting 27% of the targets. You know you're getting about 14 PPR points per game. It's just the issue is we haven't seen the spike week since week 1. In week 1, it looked great. Over 28 points. The offense was humming. Zay Flowers looked like he was taking the next step. Ever since then, he's kind of been left with a low ceiling. So I'm very curious. In this game against the Jets, they're more of a pass funnel defense. Could we get back on track? I just have my doubts because when we look at it, the Ravens are implied for 29 points. The Ravens are big favorites in this game. And Derrick Henry is second in the NFL in rushing yards since Lamar Jackson came back. So I really do think this is going to be a slow-paced game. We're going to see a lot of the big dog. And I do think this Ravens passing attack may disappoint this week. However, because he's such an alpha, because he can contend for 30+% of the targets, we need to still view Zay Flowers as a wide receiver 2. After 21, we got A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles, and there's major volatility. Like, I don't know where to rank A.J. Brown because from a physical gift perspective, from a pure talent perspective, this guy needs to be a top 5 to 10 receiver. Just, he hasn't played like it. And he hasn't even played like the best wide receiver team on the team. And I don't think that's even a conversation. Devontae Smith has straight up been better than A.J. Brown. And sure, maybe it's because of the locker room drama. Obviously, A.J. Brown's always pouting in interviews. Like, we don't really know what's going on there mentally. But I do view this matchup as a potential get right. Because the Cowboys, even though they look improved, they're still going to be a pass funnel defense. They still have a very young defensive backfield. And the Cowboys offense is going to put pressure on the other side. I really do think in a dome, with how the Cowboys offense has played, you're going to see points on the other end. So hopefully if you guys have Philadelphia Eagles, the offense can respond, although I'm a little biased and hope that the whole offense shits itself. At 22, DK Metcalf of the Pittsburgh Steelers goes on the road to play the Chicago Bears, and he has gotten 15 targets in the last 2 games. And the Bears, man, they are a great matchup for him. 5th most fantasy points allowed to wide receivers this year. The issue with DK Metcalf, man, is the Steelers' offensive projection is a complete unknown. Aaron Rodgers dealing with a left wrist injury. Is he going to play? He's listed as questionable right now. We don't really have the information on that as of right now. If it's Mason Rudolph, if it's Aaron Rodgers, I do think the matchup is exploitable. But I also think DK Metcalf is what he is. He's not going to command 12 targets on a given week. He's not going to be that, 7 for 93 layup guy, 8 for 92 layup guy. What he's going to do is he's going to get downfield targets, and if he catches a touchdown, he's probably going to be a wide receiver 2. If he doesn't catch a touchdown, you are looking at a volatile wide receiver 3, but because of a great matchup, I think he ends up being a low-end wide receiver 2 this week. Wide receiver 23, Alec Pierce. I already talked about his teammate with Michael Pittman Jr., and this is all my respect for Alec Pierce. Nearly 83 yards per game since he came back. 2.42 yards per route run since he came back, and 13.3 points per game since he came back. The skill set, it's there, man. 3-level threat. We initially viewed him, as a volatile deep threat, but he's really rounded out his game. He can run any route on the route tree, and I think he's established himself as a good X wide receiver. Matchup, it is tough. The Chiefs defense is no joke, but as we know with the Chiefs, they're going to put points on the other end, and I think the Colts stay competitive in this game. Alec Pierce, he's playing way too well to consider less than a wide receiver 2 in fantasy. And at wide receiver 24, we got Romeo Doubs of the Green Bay Packers going to play the Minnesota Vikings at home. We got 8 targets despite a down game against the Giants last week, and I do think this is the get right spot. It's really a conversation, man. Are you team Christian Watson? Are you team Romeo Doubs? I kind of do lean Doubs given the consistent targets he's seen, but I think both could provide plenty of value and what's potentially a Jacobs-less Packers offense this week. If Jacobs isn't playing, I think they'll rely upon the pass, and I think both can pay off as top 30 options. But moving on to the wide receiver 3s, we got Ricky Pearsall, Khalil Shakir, Jacoby Myers, Christian Watson, Rashid Shaheed, Jawan Jennings, Kayshon Boutte, and Wan'Dale Robinson of the New York Giants. We'll start off the top, number 25, Ricky Pearsall of the San Francisco 49ers, and not the game that we wanted to see in the return. He didn't play well. He put up a goose egg. But at the same time, I do think in his second week back from the PCL sprain, we see the Ricky Pearsall from earlier in this year. Pearsall, he operated as the 49ers wide receiver 1 when he was healthy, and this is a great game environment if he is healthy. Nearly 28 implied points, and I think he could potentially go nuclear. He played 75% of the snaps last week. I do think they want to get him more involved this week, which is why I love the higher on his 1.5 first half receptions, Panthers, pass funnel defense, and after seeing him put up a goose egg last week, I think Shanahan makes a priority to get him involved early. And at wide receiver 26 is where Khalil Shakir landed going into the week. Had a very good game on Thursday. 10 targets, 8 catches, 110 receiving yards. He is really the only bright spot on this Bills passing offense right now. It really struggled overall in that game. Sure, Texans, overall hard defense, but it was very encouraging seeing Shakir really get over the top. At wide receiver 27, we've got Jacoby Myers of the Jacksonville Jaguars on the road to play the Arizona Cardinals. Despite a limited overall snap share, he had 6 targets and 64 receiving yards. And with no Brian Thomas Jr. yet again for this game, Myers is a wide receiver 3 in my rankings. I do prefer him to Parker Washington, and as we saw with this Arizona defense, they just got bullied by the 49ers last week. If Myers' route share can expand, I do think he is the number 1 wide receiver option for a Jaguars offense implied for over 25 points. A wide receiver 28 is where Christian Watson comes in. I already mentioned his teammate with Romeo Doubs. Do you prefer Christian Watson? Do you prefer Romeo Doubs? In PPR, I do prefer Doubs given the overall targets, but at the same time, Christian Watson has an undeniable trait: being able to separate at the third level and make plays down the field. He looks healthy after his knee injury. It didn't really look like he had signs of it coming off of his return, and he just posted his best game since returning with 4 catches, 42 receiving yards, 2 receiving touchdowns. He is 6'4", does have a big frame. Maybe we see some touchdown equity. Who knows, man? What if the Packers throw the ball inside the 10, inside the 5-yard line? We expect those touches to go to Emmanuel Wilson, but at the same time, with no Josh Jacobs on the field, it is not a given that we'll see them run the ball as much as we do in the red area. Wide receiver 29, we got Rashid Shaheed of the Seattle Seahawks going on the road to play Tennessee Titans. He ran 74% of the routes in his second game as a Seahawk, and now this is a smash spot against the Titans. We know with the Titans, they seed big plays in the passing game. We talked about it realistically. How many weeks on this wide receiver tier list? Every single week it feels like. The Titans, they don't want to cover people deep. At this point in the year, it really looks like they've given up defensively, and Rashid Shaheed is a big play waiting to happen. The Seahawks, they make that aggressive move. They give up the 4 and 5, and I do think in his third week active, we see them unleash Rashid Shaheed. At 30, we got Jawan Jennings of the San Francisco 49ers going to play the Carolina Panthers on Monday Night Football at home. And I do prefer the bounce back upside that Ricky Pearsall has, but at the same time, Jawan Jennings has operated as the de facto one without him in the lineup. 5+ targets in 5 straight games, and he is averaging 11.2 PPR points per game in that stretch. It hasn't been flashy, but he has a 40% end zone target share for a top 3 projected offense on the week. That's why we're trusting Jawan Jennings, wide receiver 3 expectations. A wide receiver 31, we got Kayshon Boutte of the New England Patriots going on the road to play the Cincinnati Bengals, and he was quietly turning up before his injury. 4 touchdowns in that 3-game stretch, and we saw his road share jump to 88% before his hamstring went out. Risk, of course, coming off the injury, but he has practiced in full each of the last 3 days, and it sounds like he's going to be given a full go based off Mike Vrabel's comments. If he does get his normal route diet, maybe 75+, 80+% of the routes, the Bengals defense is one you can exploit. And then rounding off this tier, we got Wan'Dale Robinson, the New York Giants, coming in at 32 on the road against Detroit. 12.1 PPR points per game on the season. And in 4 of his last 6 games, he has been a double-digit PPR point scorer. And the Lions secondary is completely banged up. This is a God script for Wan'Dale Robinson to soak a ton of targets from Jameis Winston. I do think with Jameis Winston starting, there is more risk for the outside wide receivers to get going. But moving on to tier number 7, we have the flex plays. Darnell Mooney, Jordan Addison, Xavier Worthy, DJ Moore, Jaden Higgins, Darius Slayton, Andre Yoshivas, and Trey Tucker of the Las Vegas Raiders rounds off my top 40. A wide receiver 33, we got Darnell Mooney of the Atlanta Falcons going on the road to play New Orleans. And Mooney, man, he's been hurt. He's underperformed all year. Well, we do get positive buzz from Kirk Cousins, and we do get the opportunity without London for him to really show himself. Look, I get it. It hasn't been pretty, but he has 15 targets in his last 2 games, and we have the situation without London. Can he command 10 targets, 11 targets in this type of game environment? It is available to him. Darnell Mooney, man, it feels gross. He hasn't really done anything, but at the same time, in this range, you have to be taking your stances, and my stance is the guy that can get 10-plus targets is a viable flex. 34, Jordan Addison going up on the road to play Green Bay, and yes, I would start Darnell Mooney over Jordan Addison. Man, he got bailed out by that final drive touchdown. He put up a goose egg for 95% of the game. They obviously go on that big drive at the end against Chicago, and Jordan Addison scores that touchdown. He has had 18 targets in the last 2 games, but like Justin Jefferson, those are empty targets. J.J. McCarthy, man, he is unreliable. I'm a Michigan fan. I want J.J. McCarthy to play well, but that just simply hasn't been the case. And I think we have to accept at this point that quarterback play is an issue in Minnesota. So I do think with Justin Jefferson, he demotes to a wide receiver 15. With Jordan Addison, a guy that would usually fight for top 24, top 20 level status at wide receiver, we have to be considering as a volatile flex moving forward. And the same goes for Xavier Worthy at 35. He is questionable with the ankle injury that does play part of this ranking. But also part of it is just the fact that he hasn't played well even when he's on the field. Look, I do think there's more under the bone here. I do think he is playing hurt. But man, if he's going to continue trotting on the field, I don't know what to make of him because he's getting valuable targets. If he's able to connect on a deep pass, we do have the upside there. But I don't know, man. I'm becoming less and less optimistic by the week, and until he really has that big week, I can't rank him as a top 30 option. The same goes for DJ Moore at 36, man. I don't know what to make of him, man. He plays all the snaps. He's playing on a good offense that I like, but he just simply hasn't been productive this year. I do think he's at risk of losing his snaps moving forward with how Luther Burden has flashed. However, for this week specifically, the sample size that we do have is that DJ Moore is still a full-time route player, and we do have the spike week that he had against Cincinnati. Pittsburgh, like I mentioned, they are volatile against wide receivers on the outside. And with DJ Moore, I do think he has the talent to be able to break a big play. We just haven't seen it consistently this year. I do think this is the matchup for him to be able to bounce back. Our wide receiver 37 coming into the week was Jaden Higgins of the Houston Texans. 9 targets, 4 receptions, 38 receiving yards, and a touchdown against the Bills. And to be honest, man, he had me on notice. He ran the second most routes on the team. Does look like his route share is going up week to week. And as we know, rookies have untapped upside going forward. I do think come the fantasy football playoffs, we could be talking about Jaden Higgins as a top 24 to 30 wide receiver in fantasy. Wide receiver 38, we got Darius Slayton of the New York Giants going to play the Detroit Lions on the road. He is questionable with a hamstring injury, so I will account for a potential snap limitation. But at the same time, if he's reported as a full go, you can make the case to potentially flip him and Wan'Dale in the rankings. Lions, like I said, pass funnel defense. Jameis Winston, we know what he does for outside wide receivers, and I think that could be the case this week. So with Darius Slayton, if he is fully ready to go, he is a top 40 wide receiver in my rankings. Wide receiver 39, we got Andre Yoshivas of the Cincinnati Bengals going to play the New England Patriots at home. He's not the prettiest name. Well, with Jamar Chase out of this matchup, you're getting access to all of the Bengals routes. We've seen spike weeks from him before. It isn't, like I said, the prettiest play in the world. But if he can get 8+ targets in this game, he should pay off as a flex in PPR leagues. Wide receiver 40, we got Trey Tucker of the Las Vegas Raiders going up against Cleveland, and this is the worst game environment of the slate. There's a reason why I haven't talked about a single wide receiver in this matchup yet until wide receiver 40 in my rankings. 36 over under. Raiders only implied for 20 points in this game. It is an ugly situation. I do think you have to plug your nose and play Trey Tucker because he is averaging over 12 points per game on the year. But we do have the upside with Jacoby Myers traded that he is the number 1 wide receiver option moving forward, and you're getting access to all the routes on this team. Look, it's not pretty, but at the same time, it's better than a lot of the options out there. But either way, if you guys enjoyed, make sure you leave a like down below. And like I mentioned, if you want to tail my entry for this week, we got Stephon Diggs higher than 57.5 receiving yards, Jameson Williams higher than 10.75 fantasy points, Roma Dunze higher than 22.5 longest reception, and Ricky Pearsall higher than 1.5 first half receptions. Taylor fade my picks today. Promo code FSC. The links are in the description. But with that being said, peace out. Leave your biggest start sits in the comments. I will try to get to as many as possible. Take care.